everyone, Ashley here, and welcome to another video on the Penguin Palace Stamps YouTube channel. Today I'm sharing this fun Christmas-themed card that uses the Stencils 360 system with foiling, so it's showing kind of a fun combination of techniques, and I hope that you will learn a little something from it that you can try at home as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm starting with Stencils 360 like I said, and that base is already taped down to my work surface. It's that square piece of plastic with all the notches around. I also put in the paper positioner, which is a clear piece of plastic with an opening big enough for whatever size card you want to use. There's a whole bunch of different options. And I'm using the 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 size one. And I'm just taping in a piece of paper there with some repositionable tape so that it sticks down to my work surface. Then I can take that paper positioner out and put in the stencil guide ring. And I'm using the 6-inch guide ring and just taping it down to my work surface as well. And I'm just using the 6-inch one because that is the size of the stencil that I'm using. And there's a whole bunch of different sizes of guide rings, so you can use whichever size works with the stencil that you want to use. Finally, I put that stencil right into the middle there where it fits into the opening of the guide ring, and I'm using the fireworks stencil. This is a new one from Penguin Palace Stamps. So I lined up that stencil using the notch, and that notch is in the shape of a star, and I lined it up with the top line of the Stencils 360 guide ring and base. And I'm rotating the stencil around using the heart notches on the Stencils 360 base. So what you'll notice is that Stencils 360 base has a bunch of different shapes along those notches, and that just tells you sort of the degree to which you should rotate your stencil depending on which stencil you're using. So some stencils have heart-shaped notches in them, some have squares, some have circles, and whatever the shape of the notch in that stencil that you're using is sort of the shape that you should use when you're rotating the stencil using the Stencils 360 base. So for example, if the stencil you're using has a square notch, you should use the square lines as you're rotating the stencil, and that will achieve the desired effect. However, for stencils such as this one that have a star notch in them, it means that you can basically use any line and any rotation degree that you want, any shape, and it'll have a cool effect, and you can kind of choose what you want the look to be. So for me, for this one, I used hearts. So I rotated it around using the hearts. And what I did is I started with red, and I used Candied Apple Distress Oxide ink for that first rotation. Then I rotated it to the next heart-shaped notch, and I used a yellow color, and that was Scattered Straw Distress Oxide ink. Then for the third rotation, I used again back to the red Distress Oxide ink and Candied Apple. For the fourth heart rotation, I skipped it because that is where I will be coming back to do the foiling. So for the fifth rotation, I went back to the red. For the sixth rotation, again, I'm using the yellow. And for the seventh rotation, I will go back to the red. And then finally, for the last and eighth rotation, I will use a metallic gold. And you'll see that in a moment. What I'm doing is in between each rotation, I am pulling that stencil out and just wiping it down with a microfiber cloth off camera just to get rid of that excess ink so that I'm not blending it in between sort of the colors. So I'm not blending the red into the yellow or the yellow into the red. So that's why you see me sort of pulling that stencil away and putting it back in. But if you were using colors that were more compatible or that like it was okay if you kind of blend them together a bit, then you wouldn't even have to take that stencil out at all, and you can literally just rotate it around and continue to blend as you go. So here I am at the 8th and final rotation, and I'm just blending on some gold metallic ink like I mentioned. So just to give a little bit of a recap in case I went a little bit too fast here, what I did is I rotated the stencil along the heart notches, and there are 8 of them if you go in the full circle. So the order that I did was red, then yellow, then red, then blank, because that's where I'll bring in the foiling, then red, then yellow, then red, then gold. And that is the final pattern that you get. So once I'm done all of that inking, I'm coming back in to add the foiling, and I'm doing this as the last step because it will involve stenciling on a sort of gel-like liquid that needs to dry. So once that's added, you can't really do any other stenciling on top. So this step does need to be done last. So I just arranged that stencil so that it is on that 4th rotation of the heart. So I rotated it like past the first 3 heart rotations and onto the 4th, and that is the rotation that I had skipped when I was doing my blending. So this is the one that needs to be added into now with the foiling. So I've put the stencil where it should be, and now I'm just adding some Deco Foil Transfer Gel right over top through that stencil and onto the paper, just using this little spreading palette knife. And I'm just trying to spread it on in sort of a nice, even, and smooth application. And what this will do is this sort of jelly substance will eventually dry. It takes about, I would say 30 minutes to an hour, but really how you can tell that it's dry is that it will turn clear. So it starts out as white and it will become clear when it's dry. And that's when you know that it's ready for foiling. So I've completed sort of adding it on through the stencil there, and once I'm done, I'm just going to pull the stencil up and you can see where that gel sort of applied through the stencil. Okay, so I've let that dry off camera and now I can bring in my foil. So I'm just using this sort of bright jewel green foil because I thought it would be nice for Christmas. And what you want to do is you want to just cut down a piece that will be the right size for whatever area you're trying to cover. So I'm just using my scissors to cut it down to the appropriate size. Then what you'll do is you'll arrange it into a sort of a sandwich. So what you do is you take your panel that you're foiling onto and you put the foil right on top facing up. And then you put both of those pieces into a sandwich of parchment paper. And this is just a piece of parchment paper that I took from my kitchen and folded in half. So what you've got is your sandwich of parchment paper, and inside is your card panel with the deco foil transfer gel, and then your foil on top facing up. Then you can just place that whole thing through a laminator, and I've let my laminator heat up off camera for about 20 minutes so it's nice and hot. And I'm just running it through twice, and I'm speeding this up so you don't have to wait like I did. Once it's done, you can pull it out of the parchment paper and just kind of press down where that foil should be to really just make sure it's nice and adhered. And then you can pull back that foil and you can see that the foil is left in the spot where the deco transfer gel was. So in that nice fireworks pattern. And I'll just sort of rotate this in the light so you can see that shiny foil effect, which is really, really cool. So now I'm just going to go ahead and complete the rest of the steps of this card. And for this, I'm just using a few different sentiment bubbles that come in a Mama Elephant stamp set. And I just really liked these Christmassy holiday sentiments, and I thought that they kind of worked well for this Christmas card. I'm stamping out each one in a different Christmas themed color, so one in green, one in red, and one in yellow. And I'm going to just fussy cut them out with my scissors off camera, and so you just get those little sentiment bubbles cut out. And I'm just stamping them right onto some white cardstock. And when I cut them out, I'm just leaving a little border so you can see that little border of white around them. While I'm finishing this up, I will just mention that with the foiling technique in Stencils 360, you totally could foil sort of in more than one stencil position if you wanted to. You would just have to wait and do it, let it dry in between. So you'd have to let the first iteration of deco foil transfer gel dry before you stenciled on the second iteration. So you just have to keep that in mind. It might kind of take a little bit longer to make your card, but it could be a really cool thing to try. So definitely let me know in the comments down below if you've tried that, if you tried foiling two different sort of rotations of the Stencil 360 and how that went for you. So to finish up the card, I'm just cutting out a piece of fun foam that's slightly smaller than that card panel, and I put some double-sided tape onto both sides, and I'm just going to sandwich that in between the card panel and the card base, just to give that card panel a little bit of elevation from the card base, which I think is a really nice touch, especially for simpler cards. So I'm just putting that card panel centered right onto that card base, which is just a white card base, and sticking that down with the double-sided tape. I can finish off this card then by just adding these little sentiment bubbles right onto the center. I just sort of align them vertically so that they are going from top to bottom one by one. And I'm just adding some foam squares onto the back to give them even further dimension. And I'm just kind of cutting them apart to spread them out a little bit. Then I can take off the release paper and just stick them right down onto the card panel one by one. And I'm using my tweezers for this just to make sure I get sort of that perfect placement that I want. And again, just kind of doing this one by one until I've got them all placed down on the front of the card. So that is it. That is the card for today. As you can see, as I turn this in the light, you can see how shiny that foil is, and I think it's a really cool technique to use in combination with Stencils 360. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you learned something that you can take back to your own craft room as well. To see more of my cards, definitely head over to my Instagram account, which is linked down in the description box below, and also head over to the Penguin Palace Instagram account to see more fun cards as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!